The most difficult thing for any activist, it is when you stand against your comrades. It is when you have to confront the ills and wrongs that your own comrades are doing. And if you talk to PG, those who know him, he was deeply non-racial. The Indian question in his mind was probably secondary. Within no time, PG was in the forefront, going out of ANC structures, going out of the normal alliance structures to mobilize society against state capture, to mobilize society on a new agenda for strengthening and deepening democracy in this country, that if PG didn't do that, the Guptas will still be in power. Oh, sorry, JZ will be still. PG's revolutionary credentials stem from an absolute, complete commitment to the people, to the South African people. I met him many times and I've spoken to him many times. One thing that strikes you in dealing with PG, life was about advancing the lot of the South African people. It was about how to take South Africa out of poverty, how to take it in a different trajectory, and how to deepen the work that the African National Congress in general, but also government specifically, was doing to improve the lot of our people. Now, when we say that, he also, in the course of that, collided with many of his comrades. If I can tell you one thing, the most difficult thing for any activist, it is when you stand against your comrades. It is when you have to confront the ills and wrongs that your own comrades are doing. And many of us falter in that task because many of us look away and not confront the challenge of correcting the wrongs of our own. And PG taught us one thing, that at moments when principle matters, we have to stand. You have to stand against your very own. And many people really, I can tell you, fail in that test. They will always look on the other side or accept what is not supposed to be accepted, simply because it is their comrade. Up until his death, PG was so focused on trying to deal with issues of corruption, to deal with issues of misdirection of the African National Congress and the country. He was still focused on ensuring that the country is brought back to the central path of dealing with all the political, social, and economic morals that the country was going through. My last point is, PG was a mobilizer, a strong mobilizer, basically. Mobilization sometimes is easy to talk about because if you think about it, the first stance as a member of the ANC would be you're mobilizing the branch. There was a time when things were difficult in this country. There was a time that it was very clear and visible to anyone that the credibility and integrity of the ANC was completely undermined. We had rigorous discussions at that point, and many of the comrades who were part of these discussions are sitting here, Momo and many of them, I won't call them, were part of that conversation. What do you do? And we took a very hard decision at that time, again led by PG, to say, let's mobilize society. And the question was, how do you mobilize society? And what constitutes society? I tell you now, within no time, PG was in the forefront, going out of ANC structures, going out of the normal alliance structures to mobilize society against state capture, to mobilize society on a new agenda for strengthening and deepening democracy in this country. I can tell you now, with no fear of contradiction, that if PG didn't do that, the Guptas will still be in power. Oh, sorry, JZ will be still in power. But that's the kind of commitment that he had. He understood that the ANC is an agent for change. It is an agent for change. It is not an end in itself. The minute you look at the liberation vehicles as an end in itself, you must also know that your revolutionary credentials have come to an end. It is an important agent because if correctly organized, correctly focused, it could be the center point for remobilizing us around democracy, strengthening democracy, around non-racialism, around all of those things we believe in. But it is an agent. Agents fail sometimes, and agents succeed sometimes. But the principles don't fail. The principles are consistent, that our support to our organization must be based on principle, not based on the fact that this is our historic home, our forefathers and mothers belong to this, we grew up in this. We should be guided by principles. We should be guided by a belief for a better future for South Africans. And if our organizations don't do that as agents for change, we've got to do something to strengthen them, but we also have to do something to protect society from our own ills and our own cruelty. I end by saying that to the family of PG, and I know that if somebody says, I'm a daughter of Pravin Gordhan, I'm wife of Pravin Gordan, people think, oh, that it must be nice for you. The reality is that most of the families of our leaders go through the most difficult time. Cruelty that is supposed to be directed at our leaders gets directed to their family. I always maintain that liberation movements generally have a humane agenda. But sometimes in executing that agenda, they are the most inhumane towards each other, the individuals towards each other. PG suffered. He suffered personally. We witnessed it. His family suffered. He was demonized by many, demonized to a point where even racial slurs were thrown at him. There was a time when others even thought it wise to attack him because they happened to think he is Indian. And if you talk to PG, those who know him, he was deeply non-racial. The Indian question in his mind was probably secondary, if not third issue. His first and foremost focus in life was that he is a human being dipped in a struggle to free the human beings from oppression and exploitation. And I think that if there's any gift we can give to PG, it is to reignite a strong South African spirit that fights against ethnicism, that fights against racism, that builds a society based on democracy and an egalitarian society. I thank you.
Yeah, you heard it from yourself, guys, about this Mcebisi Jonas. You know, he speaks about how Pravin Gordhan actually saved SA from the Guptas and also ultimately from the Zuma faction, which has been actually associated a lot with the Guptas. And, you know, this whole issue with the Guptas is really interesting because I remember watching where Zuma's son, Duduzane, was actually interviewed. I think this was even last week, I think. And Zuma's son was actually asked to really speak about, because this whole issue about the Guptas had actually been something that has been resonating in South African politics. And many South Africans do not really understand who these Guptas guys are or what they did and all that. So I think it would really be interesting. Let's just hear from Duduzane on the issue of the Guptas. Who really are these guys? And I'll be back to understand how it is said that Pravin Gordhan actually saved South Africa from Zuma and the Guptas.
If I'm not mistaken, right, you don't have a bank account because of the links to the
State capture.
the
blah,
state
blah.
capture and the scandal with the Guptas, right?
Correct.
When did that all happen? When did all of that come to light?
The beginnings of it were 2015. Yeah, 2015. So by December 2015, 18th of December, the first notification came through. Like, nah, no more bank account for you, dog. You out of here, and then there was a knock-on effect, a ripple effect from there. I mean, that was bank accounts, insurance companies. It was a whole host of things, and it's difficult to operate in that manner. But anyways, that's water under the bridge. We're here.
Yeah. So, I mean, also, I think a lot of people that are watching might not know what state capture is.
Yeah.
I've always heard the words, but I've never really understood it. So I'll just read a brief description.
Cool.
So what is state capture? In South Africa, it's not only just in South Africa as well, but in South Africa, state capture refers to the systematic corruption where private interests, particularly with the Gupta family, used their close relationship with the then President Jacob Zuma to influence government decisions, appointments, and policies for their own benefit. And then it says the Guptas allegedly controlled key state institutions, secured lucrative contracts, and influenced the appointment of ministers, leading to widespread corruption and the weakening of democratic institutions. The scandal, which came to light during Zuma's presidency, caused significant political and economic damage to South Africa. Right? So you were kind of caught up in the middle of all of this, and you were accused. It said here that the state capture allegations against you were that it says Duduzane was accused of playing a central role in the state capture scandal, facilitating the Guptas' access to key government officials and resources, right?
That's what is alleged, yes. That's allegations.
Yeah, so these are obviously all allegations.
Sure.
And there was a lot of other allegations.
Sure.
And this is obviously not just you as well. There was like hundreds of people, if not thousands, linked to all of this. So if you could just give us some context as to what happened, what your relationship looked like with them, and what's happened since then, since this kind of all came to light.
Right, so I'll be brief with that one. Great relationship with the Gupta family at the time. Business-wise, I learned a whole of a lot from them. Astute, they were super sharp. They introduced me to the broader business globally. So the international part of my business dealings is thanks to them. Over a period of time, it went the way it did, and I've last had interaction or discussions with them 2019. So that relationship doesn't exist any longer. On my own, doing my own thing.
Yeah, interesting. So what do you guys think? It's really interesting that the Guptas have actually understood this way. They're apt businessmen. They're really sharp, businessmen who actually got into the affairs of government and actually then, spearheaded what many have now called state capture in that regard of trying to really still grow their business, but at the same time working with politicians and all that. And so all of this roped Zuma in. But let's understand the perspective from Pravin Gordhan's, influence in the finance ministry in South Africa, and how that whole debacle between Pravin Gordhan, Jacob Zuma, and the Guptas really made him sort of like the hero he's actually praised to be today. So a really interesting report from the Daily Maverick anyway also actually tries to analyze this issue with Pravin Gordhan really carefully. It says that from his deathbed, Pravin Gordhan planned his exit, taking the real MK and the history of the ANC back to the troubled KwaZulu-Natal, which is the home of the struggle stalwart's mortal enemies, Jacob Zuma. It says the home of one of the struggle stalwart's mortal enemies, Jacob Zuma. So Jacob Zuma was a mortal enemy to Pravin Gordhan, and it's really interesting. But let's understand why. So it says that it was in KwaZulu-Natal that Pravin Gordhan, a lifelong Charterist, which is a movement that grew out of the non-racial Congress movements and the adoption of the Freedom Charter in 1955, alongside other young student activists in the 1980s and the 1970s, they planned for and established the concept of mass mobilization in South Africa. So he speaks about how that the ENC's Political Military Strategy Commission at its 1979 National Executive Committee meeting at Morogoro in Tanzania adopted the famous Green Book, which set out that unity of action should be a goal. Now, Pravin Gordan's input was invaluable, in that green book. And it says that if you thought of Gordon's state funeral held at the Durban International Conference Center on Thursday felt like a political rally, a moment of truth-telling and a political compass reset, you might be right, because Pravin Gordhan died with his combat boots on, okay? And he was said to have hit Julius Malema a lot and the EFF during this period for corruption and all that. Julius Malema, I think the EFF even are not happy with him moving in death. I think they've said that they wouldn't be attending his funeral, and also Julius Malema had a lot of bitter things to say about Pravin Gordhan even in death. So it appears that Pravin Gordhan was a stalwart, a force in South Africa's politics. But anyway, it says that Jacob Zuma's Kong MK is attempting to cover the province in green, the province of KZN in green, while gathering toxic political barnacles like former EFF founder Floyd Shivambu is where we should look at now, this was a warning by Pravin Gordhan. So Pravin Gordhan said, before he died, actually says that one thing that South Africa should be worried about is the fact that Jacob Zuma is now pulling the EFF, founding leader Floyd Shivambu, because it actually speaks to a tactic or a strategy which Gordhan seems to have known Zuma for many years now. So it says that in his last interview before retiring, Pravin Gordhan spoke of dangerous times ahead, and that while South Africa might have somewhat righted the good ship, which is SA for now, state capture sleepers remained embedded in the machine. So despite the fact that today it appears that state capture might, have abated with the emergence of the government of national unity and all that, Pravin warned South Africa that state capture is still embedded in the machine, in the machinery of politics in South Africa, and that, he warned South Africa before he departed. It says that the forces of the implicated are gathering for a last massive push to stay out of jail at all costs and to disrupt the rule of law and logic. Now, on the day of Pravin Gordhan's state funeral, Jacob Zuma's party was actually, he said here in this report, says that they were altering reality in the National Assembly, where it now occupies 58 seats, offering a draft resolution by its new MP, which is now the former, and they are implicated anyway, Eskom and Transnet CEO Brian Molefe. It says that MK calls upon the government, this is now Molefe speaking, representing MK. He says that MK calls upon the government to reject any tariff hikes that disproportionately affect the most vulnerable in our society, and to honor the legacy of President Jacob Zuma, who always fought for the poor and ensured that their voices were heard. Now, Pravin Gordhan's former MK operation, which was called Vula, Operation Vula. Pravin Gordhan had a former MK Operation Vula comrade who was named Mak Maharaj, okay? It says that he reminded the mourners on that day and those watching the live broadcast of Pravin Gordhan's funeral that without the media and the fight back mounted by Pravin Gordhan and his formidable team at the treasury, South Africa would have become a banana republic, all right? Now, he says that Maharaj, still speaking, actually says that the corrupt, they had hurled everything against Pravin Gordhan, and neither the captured public protector, which is now an EFF MP, and the SA Revenue Service, SA Police Service, National Prosecuting Authority, as well as the power of the presidency, could concoct fake intelligence to rubbish a person's identity, had managed to shake Gordhan. So in other words, they argue that both the NPA, National Prosecuting Authority, the South African Revenue Service, the South African Police Service, the South African Revenue Service, and also the Public Protector, they all tried to really paint Pravin Gordhan's image in a sort of strange way, but all of those didn't shake this man. He was solid as a rock. So what were the foundations for the resistance? It speaks about, this is now a small historical lesson. It speaks about that how while Zuma and others were in exile in Swaziland, Mozambique, Tanzania, Angola, the UK and Europe, young activists, students like Gordan began to organize and mobilize inside South Africa. He says that Gordan is acknowledged as a master tactician by all he schooled. He worked with and fought alongside in the trenches and as a principal in many positions and ministries in democratic South Africa. Now, as a young activist, Pravin Gordhan found material for the famous Green Book in Vietnamese struggle history. He says that his former comrade, who was Abba Omar, who is now the director of operations at the Mapungubwe Institute, wrote a tribute after Gordhan's death on the 13th of September that he always placed an emphasis. Pravin always placed an emphasis on the relationship between concrete action and communications. Alright? So this was Gordon's ideology. It says that on one of the earliest tracts which Pravin Gordhan shared with this Abba Omar now was a copy of an article by Le Duan, who was a Vietnamese communist politician. One of his memorable lines was, "The revolutionary method is to apply an offensive strategy and know how to win step by step." So Pravin Gordhan was also an admirer of communism, and that's why the struggle from the perspective of the ANC struggle actually was also really important to him. But it appears that he came from one other wing at the end of the day when South Africa became democratic to fight for the sort of like a return of corruption by the revolutionaries of the ANC who had actually tried to fight the injustice and exploitation by the apartheid regime at the time. So it appears that this is how Pravin Gordhan sought to really fight for South Africa from that perspective. So Le Duan, this Omar now still writes about Le Duan. He says he distinguished between a more strategic political slogan with action slogans which would be used to mobilize communities on immediate issues. Now, it then says that the author poignantly highlighted that this cross-section, cross-generation and cross-class mobilization celebrated its pinnacle when the process towards a democratic essay was firmly laid with the unbanning of various organizations and the release of leaders and returns of exile, and holding also the 1994 election and 1996 adoption of the democratic constitution. So the Save South Africa and Zuma Must Fall campaigns are sterling examples of Pravin Gordhan's capacity to mobilize in real. So Pravin Gordhan really mobilized against Jacob Zuma, in terms of in his interpretation of how to save South Africa and the fact that Zuma must fall. So Pravin Gordhan was at the center of that. He says Pravin Gordhan was a man of steel forged in fire. This Maharaj now on Thursday told those who were mourning for Pravin Gordhan, including former Justice Raymond Zondo, who was really tearful at this, and President Cyril Ramaphosa, that Pravin Gordhan was a man of steel. Okay, he was forged in the furnace of struggle against a lawless system whose world was defined by the color of one's skin. Those who have met with or worked with Pravin Gordhan have spoken of his spiritual rootedness. Pravin Gordhan was a Marxist, he was a communist, and therefore not religious, but it was he who brought the notion of the greater good to the South Africa Revenue Service when he was the commissioner of SARS. It says that Pravin Gordhan built SARS into a formidable engine and was the first to investigate politicians, including Julius Malema's Ratanang Family Trust. Malema declared Pravin Gordhan an enemy from that day on. Pravin Gordhan watched in horror as Jacob Zuma and his allies, including Tom Moyane and various sleepers, began to destroy the South Africa's Revenue Service and to weaponize the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation with men like Benin Inslemeza at the helm of affairs, while the National Prosecuting Authority, headed by Sean Abrahams, targeted also Pravin Gordhan. So it says that it was Pravin Gordhan and his colleagues also who stood firm against Jacob Zuma's ruinous illegal nuclear deal with Rosatom, and tried to protect the treasury from a full attack by the Gupta family and its enablers inside the government. It says that it was Pravin Gordhan who first joined the dots. Gordhan was banned, detained and tortured during the apartheid years and never lost his resolve. In the freedom he helped to usher in, he was actually vilified by the corrupt, many of whom celebrated his death. Now, bringing home the facts and the deep history of Pravin Gordhan's service to the struggle, South Africa's Communist Party, the ANC, and democracy in KZN will hopefully restore true liberators like Gordhan to their deserved status. So anyway, this is actually one of the ways in which the Daily Maverick now has tried to really interpret, Pravin Gordhan's influence in South Africa, and trying to really help us see from a historical perspective that Gordhan was a communist. He was non-religious, but at the same time he was really ethical, and he really pursued transparency in the revenue service. The moment he tried to investigate Julius Malema's family trust, he became an enemy of the EFF. And there are lots of videos on YouTube where you see Julius Malema and the EFF actually blasting Pravin Gordhan. And many times I really did not even understand most of those speeches when he spoke about Pravin until I started doing my research and seeing where Pravin Gordhan actually is placed in South Africa's history. So he decided to shake up the South Africa Revenue Service and take it for its legitimacy as a organ of South Africa's political machinery. But at the same time, many people criticize him for selling South Africa out, because he also was alleged in some deals also that were not ethical, and that there were some parts of South Africa that actually were not managed properly, and I think I'll be doing another research on that to see the other side of Pravin Gordhan and his critics, how they criticize him in that regard. But anyway, for now, this is actually what many actually have seen Pravin Gordhan's influence in South Africa as one that really was anti-Zuma, and he protected the economy of South Africa from the Guptas and Zuma. And I think that's kind of like a really interesting take, but I'll continue doing the research and try to really bring out the other side of Pravin Gordhan's leadership in South Africa for us to see the full picture of all the narrative. But anyway, what do you guys think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments.